My name's Jackson Caines. I've been employed as a housing campaigner and community organiser at Harrow Law Centre, and they provide free legal advice and representation to local people on a range of issues. Usually the core issues are around housing, benefits and immigration, but other law centres have their own specialties as well. Pamela Fitzpatrick, who's the director of Harrow Law Centre, decided last year that they would recruit for this new position, housing campaigner and community organiser. And this is something that law centres haven't done before. When I tell people I work for a law centre, they assume that I have a legal background, but that's not the case. My colleagues are all lawyers, but I have a social housing management background. I worked for Hackney Council as a housing officer, and I'm an activist with an interest in housing in my own time. So that's why I applied for this role. And really, creating the role of the housing campaigner was a response to seeing that the sorts of problems that local people have in Harrow are systemic, structural problems. You can help people significantly through legal casework, through helping individuals on a case-by-case basis. But you know, Pamela is very political. She's a councillor, and of course, she realised that if we wanted to make sort of longer-term progress on housing issues in the borough of Harrow, then it made sense to have someone who was focusing more on organising, on policy, on campaigning for political change, and helping to create grassroots campaigns as well. And the idea is that that would complement the legal casework that my colleagues in the Law Centre do. So it was in my job description that I would help to facilitate tenant-led campaigns. And that's what's happened with Trident Point, which is really the first proper campaign that I've been involved in this post at Harrow Law Centre. Trident Point is a block in Harrow, fairly near Harrow on the Hill tube station. And Harrow residents will probably be familiar with it. It's been a fairly notorious block since it opened 10 years ago. And even before I started working at Harrow Law Centre, it had made quite a few appearances in local media, local newspapers over the years, just because of the many problems in the block, from terrible problems with lift disrepair. You have 2 lifts on the side of the block where Metropolitan Thames Valley's social tenants live, and usually there's one lift out of order, and often both lifts are out of order, which of course causes great inconvenience and stress for the residents. But there's all sorts of other issues as well. There's heating issues communally and within people's flats. There's problems with rodents. There's problems with damp throughout the block, which is causing problems to people's flooring. And there's problems with security. The block initially had a concierge service, which gave residents peace of mind, but that was removed without consultation, I believe, shortly after the block opened. And the door entry systems to the block are often out of order. People's deliveries, their packages are always getting stolen. So residents at Trident Point often have a pretty negative experience of living there. So once I took up this post of housing campaigner at Harrow Law Centre, I was familiarising myself with the sorts of issues that local people were facing. It wasn't long before I became familiar with Trident Point, not least because Harrow Law Centre, we were familiar with a couple of residents from that block because they'd been our legal clients, either direct because of housing issues or other issues. So I did a bit of sort of detective work, got to speak to some people in the block, started inspecting it myself, and started to have some really good conversations with residents in the block, a mixture of leaseholders and social tenants, because it's a mixed-use block. They have both, and it became clear that there was a real appetite to try something a bit different, try something new in the block, to force the management companies to to resolve these long-standing issues. I think residents had made attempts over the years to express their grievances. They'd often do this individually by making formal complaints or sending angry emails to staff from the management companies. But of course, you often don't get very far if you're just complaining on an individual basis. And I think maybe there'd been tentative attempts over the years to form some kind of residents association, but it hadn't really got off the ground. So they were all there, sort of ready to fight, ready to get together and fight for improved conditions. The benefit of my role is that I can come in and just give them a little nudge if that's what they need, and also offer all kinds of support and resources in terms of graphic design and printing and organising, WhatsApp groups and email lists and things like this. But really trying to get the balance right, and really in terms of the political priorities and the priorities for campaigning and the sort of approach they want to take, really letting the tenants take the lead and make the decisions and set the tone, because it's not a model of change which believes in one heroic individual sort of swooping in and saving the day, because it doesn't work like that. And with block campaigns like this, ideally you want to put in place some kind of structure, some kind of infrastructure which can actually which is sustainable and will outlive this particular campaign. Trident Point Action Group have launched their campaign online by publishing a collective statement which sets out their 7 demands around improved block management in Trident Point. They're starting off with this letter and a call to action for Metropolitan, and the response has been excellent, because later this week there will be a meeting between representatives of the landlord and residents. But what the letter also says, what the collective statement also says, is that if we don't see significant progress on these issues, then the tenants will consider a rent strike. And I think that's really important, because as well as just sort of making a moral case for action, it's really important that you actually have that weapon in your back pocket in case you need to use it. Otherwise, there'd be no way to escalate. So that came out of conversations with residents. It was something that they felt they were willing to do if necessary. They felt it was proportionate after 10 years of mismanagement from the landlord. So watch this space. There may be escalation. There may be some kind of rent strike if we don't see the progress that we want to see from the landlord. So we're in the middle of this campaign at the moment. And of course, I hope it's successful. I hope the 7 demands that have been made by Trident Point Action Group are met by Metropolitan Thames Valley. But even if whether they are or aren't, I hope that this core of residents who have come together remain organised and build something lasting, so that when problems arise in the future, they don't have to start from scratch. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They have this constant, they have this collective presence, and they're in a dialogue with management, and they're stronger because they've organised. My focus recently has been this campaign with the residents of Trident Point to get better block management from their landlord. But of course, the housing crisis manifests itself in many different ways in the borough of Harrow. People who are housing campaigners will be familiar with all the symptoms. For example, there's a real crisis around temporary accommodation in Harrow. You have lots of people who aren't able to secure permanent council housing, and in the meantime, they're often given temporary accommodation, which unfortunately is not always of an acceptable standard. We hear lots of stories in the Law Centre of people who are placed by the council into properties which are often leased from private landlords, where there's lots of very bad disrepair issues, lots of damp and mould, and it's not really suitable for the people who live there, often quite vulnerable people or families. Sometimes they then have to be moved from the temporary accommodation into emergency accommodation because they need to do remedial works in the temporary accommodation. And it just adds to this cycle of sort of insecurity and stress for the residents who are in that situation. And of course, there are problems of homelessness and street homelessness in Harrow, just as there are across the city. So the housing crisis manifests itself in many ways, but I hope to use this Trident Point campaign as a sort of model for resident-led, tenant-led grassroots action, which can be applied across Harrow to tackle various issues from damp and mould to temporary accommodation, as well as block management.